Okay, we are live. Okay, this is Senate Finance. We are back. We're continuing our just update report on the dispatch. And today on the dispatch committee and the progress. And today we have Commissioner of the Department of Safety, Jen Morris, who is the co-chair of that committee. And we're just trying to get a handle on, the committee is concerned because we haven't made a whole lot of progress since last year, and just trying to get your perspective on what's been happening.
Good afternoon. Thank you, ma'am. My name is Jennifer Morrison. For the record, I'm the Commissioner of the Department of Public Safety. I appreciate you taking extra time. I know you talked with my colleague, Barb Neal, who is the co-chair of the Public Safety Communications Task Force on Wednesday. So I'm going to try not to repeat what she said,
Okay.
but you can come back to anything that you want to ask me about. It is my understanding that you want to talk to me mostly about the general progress of the task force, and also the intended expenditure of the $9 million in congressionally directed spending.
Yes.
So let me.
And I think that 9 million number has been being tossed around, I think, even before it came in, and just be interested on what is it, its use.
Sure.
I have a feeling we don't have a lot of control over it.
I think that's a fair statement, but you have a lot of influence. So let me just say this. Relative to the overall progress of the task force, I'm very clear that this committee expressed frustration and disappointment in what they perceived to be a lack of progress by the task force. I'm not going to say that we aren't exactly where we want to be. I would estimate that we're about 6 weeks behind where we wanted to be. It's not a catastrophic delay. It just, by way of recapping, Act 78, the big bill, was passed on June 20th. The task force held its first meeting on June 28th. So we did not waste time getting things up and going as soon as the legislation was passed. The following week was a holiday, the week of July 4th, and that Friday, the Department of Public Safety and numerous other state entities became subsumed by impending catastrophic flooding that indeed turned out to be catastrophic flooding. And we went into a 24/7 operation for months. I would estimate conservatively that the flooding slowed us down by about 6 weeks. So that, plus the late start date out of the gate in June, we've had about five and a half months of active work. So I don't share the general assessment that nothing has happened. We've actually accomplished quite a bit, and I know Barb went over some of that with you. Some of the administrivia related to procurement and contracts and RFPs being posted and reopened for various reasons, they did slow us down. There's no doubt about it. But all the while, we've been continuing to work towards our intended purpose of building a very solid foundation for what is going to be a years-long endeavor. This is not a slapdash race to a preconceived finish line and then go implement the plan. Act 78 is very expansive. The scope of work included in that, it requires a turn over every rock and inventory. It even requires that we record serial numbers of pieces of equipment that exist in the existing space of public safety communications. This is a very big project, and to not get it right with the right supports in place at the beginning is going to doom it to failure. So yes, we've been deliberate, we've been careful, and we believe we're on a really good path right now. We have, as Barb said, a project manager. We are in contract negotiations for a system design firm, subject matter experts to assist us in the much bigger work that is to come. And the last thing I'll say about the general work of the task force is, everybody on the task force has operated and lived and worked in the public safety space for decades. We are pretty long in the tooth in terms of experience. And if there's one thing I know about the first responder community and the general public in Vermont, is that they want to be sure that we present options, that we don't present, this is what we're doing. And that is going to require a rather extensive public engagement piece and feedback and opportunity to hear from people. So this is not a one-year project. This is a multi-year project to get to a decision-making point to then get to an implementation strategy. And I think that if we gloss over the actual volume and scope of the work, that it's very easy to then come back on this task force and criticize that we haven't moved quick enough. But we'd rather get it right than get it fast. And so unless you have questions, I will shift to the history and the current status of the $9 million.
Okay, do we have any questions, Senator from Hinsdale?
Yeah, Jen, would you say the scope changed at all in your mind after the flood? I know GovOps is talking about reverse 911 and, you know, other shortcomings of our communication systems. Do you see any reason to rethink any piece of this after the multiple disasters we faced last year?
You know, I actually think the scope as written is extremely thorough. It's more thorough than possibly necessary, although I'd rather have more information than not enough, right? So I don't think the scope of the work to get to a place where we have multiple options for what the future of emergency communication should look like, because best practices and the first responder community ability to communicate with one another, plus the public to communicate with us, is implied and infused throughout all the pieces of the project as written in Act 78. So I don't think the scope has changed. I think the sense of urgency has probably grown because people are, you know, experiencing it and feeling it quite acutely based on what happened this summer.
Can I? I was being reminded the depth of the scope we did put in, but can you just refresh my memory if there's a piece about language access, and if when you do your public engagement process, you are going to be trying to engage with people who don't speak English as a first language?
That is not part of Act 78 as written, but that is absolutely the type of feedback that we need to start thinking about how we would approach that. So yes, we can apply, because we are providing administrative support. I believe that that would be part of the obligation of the Department of Public Safety to make sure that those engagement, whatever form that takes, is approachable to people who do not have English as their first language. So thank you. I will add that to the list, our ever-growing list. You're welcome.
Any other questions, Senator McDonald?
What is the $9 million that is available supposed to be used to
Okay,
do?
that's where that's the
Yeah.
next thing that she's going to.
This is great. I'm happy to go right there, and unless somebody else wants to follow up on general topics.
I'm not seeing any more questions.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. So I just want to remind folks that the original intent of this $9 million, this is a plan that was hatched in January, February, March of 2022, when Commissioner Sherling was the commissioner and I was the deputy commissioner. There was a recognition in the first responder community, particularly inside the Department of Public Safety, that our two PSAPs, our public safety answering points, which also provide dispatch services because they're separate, 911 call taking and dispatching are two separate functions, that our centers were under tremendous strain, both from a workforce perspective, but also from the fact that we dispatch for over 100 non-state entities between those two centers. And that is a result of consolidation from two PSAPs down to two, from a variety of different circumstances where first responder agencies over the years lost their dispatch, and we were the backstop to that. Under Commissioner Sherling, we recognized the inequity of the existing system where some agencies were paying an annual amount and others were not. So trying to address the inequity and trying to stabilize our two PSAPs and more equitably distribute the workload throughout the state, by geographically, we proposed to secure this funding to issue subgrants to willing partners, entities such as a police agency or a EMS agency that wanted to become regional operators. And so we wrote the grant with specific language of our intent. And it was an organic path toward regional centers that was not coordinated statewide. It was not. It did not involve promulgation of standards for technology. It did not involve governance requirements. So it was an organic path towards redoing the landscape of emergency communications across the state. The great news is that we were awarded the maximum amount under the congressionally directed spending that year of $9 million. The bad news is they gave it to us through the COPS technology funding stream, which specifically disallows subgrants. And despite our application being very clear of what we intended to do with it, and it only allows purchase of equipment that falls within the scope of improving statewide emergency communications and interoperability, only includes equipment owned and maintained by the state. So we couldn't even, under the way we received the money, go buy equipment for another entity that they could then own. So when we got the money in that stream, there was already indication, this is in the fall of 2022, there was already indication that there would be legislation introduced in the new session in 2023 on the same topic. So we were trying to adjust to the fact that we had this challenge of the constraints of the COP technology stream as opposed to the way we had envisioned it. And we were also not eager to get out in front of what we knew was proposed legislation from Senator Hardy and others who were interested in this topic and taking a different approach than the one the Department of Public Safety had been on when we applied for the money. So the legislative session happens last year. As you know, Act 78 was the vehicle by which this planning for the future of statewide public safety communications came out. And now we are trying to be compliant with federal deadlines attached to the funding, but also expend that $9 million in a way that is most consistent with the intent of Act 78. So it's not been, point A, point B, super smooth. The good news is the initial plan that we submitted, we were required to submit a plan for approval to the feds at the end of last August. That plan was approved and it's since been redrafted. Okay. As this process has evolved, we recognize that initial plan was deficient in some ways. It was not as good as it could be, and it needed to be improved. So we are in the final stages of finishing that draft plan. And at the same time, we have just gotten into contract negotiations with a project manager to manage the approximately 11 or 12 different projects that pot of money will pay for. And we've also just finishing a procurement process for an independent expert review of our proposed plan. So two things have happened, and two things are happening. One, the task force, the Public Safety Communications Task Force, has weighed in on our plan for the $9 million and has endorsed it. That plan has since changed slightly. There's a couple elements of it that have changed. And we will be going back to them again while we try to secure an independent expert review. And that process has proved a little bit challenging. And that's about all I can say about it right now because it's still an active procurement process. So we're trying to make sure that there's outside eyes on it to ensure that our thoughts around what is most consistent with Act 78 and in the best interest of a future system is what we spend the money on. We are aware that there's commentary and criticism in the ethers that public safety is using the money to feather their own nest, and that we're just doing things that we want to do, et cetera. And I don't know what to say other than please check with me to get facts about how the Department of Public Safety is approaching anything. And let's see.
So
I guess I'll stop there and let you ask me some questions.
Okay, I think we have one question from Senator McDonald.
So my question was, what is the 9 million supposed to be paying for?
Sure.
The answer that I think I got was to purchase equipment owned and maintained by the state to perform
Yeah.
certain tasks.
Sure. So I'd need a minute to pull up where we are on the revised plan. It is a draft revised plan. Again, we're waiting on independent expert review and another round of review by the task force. So for instance,
Before I would hope that we could concentrate on what the plan is after we understand what the tasks that this grant is supposed to perform.
okay. So the plan generally is to build a backbone infrastructure and to expand the existing statewide land mobile radio landscape. So I just want to remind you that we currently support over 100 local EMS, fire, and police agencies with that backbone. So the plan is to upgrade and build redundancy and resiliency in that. For instance, in places where there are towers that only have a gasoline generator backup, the plan would be to add a solar array so that you don't have to send folks up. I'm not clear what you're asking for. I'm trying to describe to you the broad plan, and then if you want to get into the more nitty-gritty around the fact that we're negotiating with Velco to expand the radio footprint and have space on 10 more sites. Like, I don't know what level of granularity you're looking for, sir.
Is the grant purpose to purchase the equipment necessary to carry out the goal that we're gonna add, someone will tell us about?
So is the grant's purpose or is the grant's constraints are two different questions? What we can spend it on, I've already explained. We are trying to take the legal requirements.
Equipment owned and maintained and operated by the state is what you can spend it on?
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Now we need to know what the plan is, so we'll know what equipment you want to get and that will be maintained and operated by the state. But it says I was trying to take it in smaller bites and not have to outline the whole presentation.
Okay, no, I'm not prepared to make a whole presentation on a draft plan. I'm prepared to give you an overview of what the nature of the investments would be and how that benefits the entire state by building resiliency into the existing state system, expanding the existing state system. For instance, one of the changes to the plan that we are awaiting further review on is to create a statewide P25 simulcast network, originally for the use by the Vermont State Police and others who are on our current radio system, this would include the infrastructure necessary to enable other entities to also achieve a simulcast network if they desired. And it is the precursor to being able to have a statewide trunked radio system, should that be the recommendation of our subject matter experts. It is highly likely that a trunked radio system going forward is part of the future design. But of course, it doesn't have to be used for that, but it is a precursor state necessary to get to a trunked system. So those are examples of some of the things that are in this plan that is awaiting further input.
Is there other money that's available to write the plan that is going to say, dictate the equipment that will be owned and maintained by the state?
We have a plan that, as I mentioned, we have updated by dropping a couple components out and adding a couple components. We have just hired a project manager who would be responsible for coordinating all of the more discrete projects that compromise the $9 million. And that, so I don't have a comprehensive plan to say, here, this is it, but we are really close to getting to that space, hoping to get independent expert review before we launch it into the universe.
And is there a separate pool of money that will pay for and conduct the independent review, which will determine what is purchased and maintained and owned by the state?
That is an allowable expense, as is project management in this congressionally directed spending. So that would come out of the $9 million.
Any other questions? Randy, do you have?
Just looking at where you are right now and where you think the legislation should take you. Can you address a little bit the issue of time and timelines as to what we want? Obviously, is an end result that is a statewide telecommunications system that is effective, that works, that deals with all the relevant parties who need telecommunications, does so in an equitable way. Do you have any best estimates on the timeline and the major components of steps in between getting to that end result?
Two things. One, I don't believe it is the task force's work to design a telecommunications system. It is our work to design a public safety communication system. And I believe there's significant differences between the two. But that being said, the work that we have in front of us, based on initial information from talking with our project managers who are industry experts, it will be aggressive for us to achieve the deadlines in Act 78 as proposed, which is to have a preliminary plan by December with a final plan by mid-January of next year. Doesn't mean it won't happen, but it will be aggressive. It will require running in multiple lanes at once. I suspect, based on my experience with large-scale projects in the past, Senator Brock, that if, let's just presume we did by next January have the options, the final report of what the future system might look like, it will take months to properly engage with various stakeholder groups, including yourselves and the rest of the assembly, public, first responder entities, the general public, any other industry experts who should be consulted. If we're going to make a selection that will likely be very expensive and take many years to implement, we need to take the opportunity to get that level of stakeholder feedback. I would guess that it would be at least 2 years before any shovels went in the ground, or if a final selection of the path forward is. That would be Jen Morrison's guess, but I don't design systems like this for a living, so I'm relying on others and on my experience with large-scale project management.
In terms of the $9 million as a starting point, my understanding is that has to be committed by the end of this year. And does that mean allocated, or does that mean identified, or does that mean actually spent? That
means actually spent with a 120-day mop-up period to, pay bills, et cetera, on the back end, finish billing periods and to pay bills. We have asked repeatedly the the COPS office if we can have an extension for that. It's called the performance period of the grant. We've asked repeatedly. We were told that back in the summer that it's possible we might get a 30-day extension, which, I mean, that sounds like something, but it's not much. We are going to continue to pursue the options of an extension if it becomes clear that that is necessary. The only sort of silver lining to the fact that this is a tight turnaround is that my understanding is that once the money is allocated and awarded, they don't claw it back unless you say you can't use it, and that we could reapply for the balance of it in a future year's congressionally directed spending. This is input I've received from folks at the COPS office and from others who have had these large scale grants in the past. So I'm not taking that to the bank, but I'm more comfortable that the money does not disappear if we don't expend it all by 12/29/24 than I was a few months ago.
To make sure that I understand what you've indicated is that, are you saying that if some portion of the money is allocated and expended, along with a plan to spend the rest of it at some point in the future, you can't spend that right now because of the limitation, but you feel more comfortable that it might be available at some point in the future?
No, if we, let's just say we had 12 final discrete projects that we were using this money for, and only 8 of them could be done, the work completed by the end of the performance period. Let's just hypothetically say that left $2.5 million on the table that we had not expended. It is my understanding that we could reapply for that $2.5 million in another round of congressionally directed spending, and that it would be awarded for the same project. It would probably come back through the same funding stream, but I would certainly try to get it out of there if that were how we had to play it.
Well, as of now, you have the $9 million to expend. Who makes the decision as to what it may be expended on and when?
The final decision is mine. It is my name on the award with the federal government. However, be very clear, we have already consulted with the task force. We intend to take our revised plan back to the task force. And as I mentioned, we are seeking to have independent expert review to confirm that it's not just our belief that this is the best way to align ourselves with the intent of Act 78.
So the task force doesn't have an actual veto power, but you will take into account its recommendations and its review of your plan before you expend the money. Is that a fair statement?
That's a fair statement.
Okay. The task force and the way it is organized right now, particularly with the co-chair arrangement, do you feel that that is the best way to move forward, or would we be better with a single source of leadership at that level?
I think it works just fine. I think we've worked rather seamlessly together. Barb has different experience and strengths than I do. I think given the fact that this is an ancillary responsibility of everyone on the task force, it is not anyone's full-time job, that having a certain level of it's tri-leadership. There's a co-chair, there's a vice chair, excuse me. So having that number of people being able to step in and pick up the ball and run with a meeting is perfectly agreeable. That it has not presented any problems. We've had no disagreements on the task force, and we've had no problem achieving a quorum. There has not been a single meeting that has not been able to have a quorum. So I don't have any recommendation to improve it. It's actually moving pretty smoothly.
We certainly have had situations in the past in which we've had major problems to deal with. And in some cases, we've found that they are of such importance that it might be useful to put some individual in charge. I won't call that person a czar by any means, but someone who has a direct responsibility into which it is that person's job to move this forward and keep it on schedule. Would it help to do that in this situation?
I think there could come a time where that might be, particularly as we head towards implementation. But I think that if you were to do that now, before we receive the input through stakeholder engagement and before we hear from the subject matter experts, that you're going to be more open to the criticism of a person driving us towards their preferred future, as opposed to being wide open to the array of possibilities and allowing the process to play out to where we get to the decision by the task force following the engagement and feedback session. And then as we head towards implementation, it might very well be wise to make it a person's responsibility who can focus on that more than a few hours a week.
Of the contracts that have been let right now, if any, to get to the end result, what has been let? What have we ordered done at this point?
We have a contract for project management specific to the task force. Again, that is a trusted advisor and technical expert for the task force members to rely on. That is under contract. We are
And that
actively.
is a person in place to do that, or an organization in place to do
Yes.
that?
Yes, that's a company named Televate, and we have been meeting with our two primary reps regularly. We are in active contract negotiations with a vendor following a procurement process for the the system design, which is the bulk of the work that's found in Act 78. Everything from the inventorying to mapping of dead zones to looking at proposed governance, looking at possible ways of paying for it, and then making recommendations on what the options are. So we are in active contract negotiations for that. The only other contract that we are seeking to fulfill that is held up a bit is for independent legal counsel for the task force. As it turns out, we haven't needed independent legal counsel, but the task force felt strongly that they should have that available to them should there become any issues that would be appropriate for consultation with an attorney.
Is there anything that you see that you feel should be changed or done differently or done better, or other people brought to the table to expedite getting this done in the best possible manner at this point? Or would you just leave everything just the way it is?
Well, I mean, in a perfect world, there would be people who could focus on this full time, but it wouldn't be one person, as I've already explained, that I think the optics and the reality of that would not be in the best interest of a long-term project that requires buy-in and participation from across the state. In a perfect world, it would be a variety of people who could devote 20 or more hours a week to this, but that is going to become the job of the people that we will hire to do the system design. So I think Senator Brock, if I can sort of pull on some of the threads from what your conversation with Barb was and what I believe you're trying to drive at with me is we're in the getting out of the gate stage, and there is concern that we're not going fast enough. I hear that. I understand that. Once we get out of the gate with the full team assembled, methodically and carefully assembled, I believe that the tempo ticks up dramatically and that we will make a lot of progress and run in a lot of lanes at once that a task force of people with other full-time jobs can't actually do the work of.
So at what point would you suggest that, based on that we check back to ensure that we are making that kind of progress at that kind of pace?
Sure. I would say that I would check back within 60 days of the system design firm.
And what should we look for by way of measurement to tell us that we are in fact on that track? What would you suggest that we look at?
I'd have to think about exactly what that looks like in the first 60 days. Part of the work, of course, of working with our project manager and the project manager of the firm that is awarded the bid to do that work is to build a work plan and timelines. So I certainly would think you would want to see those work plans and timelines and get regular updates. I can tell you that the project managers for the task force are going to begin doing more external comms so that people like yourself, but also more importantly, the first responder community can have regular updates pushed to them instead of us having a passive system where if they want info, they can come to the task force's website. So we're going to begin doing a little more external communication to stakeholders so that folks are really aware of what the task force is dealing with and what progress is being made.
Thank you. Well, I don't want to monopolize discussion, maybe other members of the committee who have questions or concerns.
Any other, okay.
Thank you very much, Commissioner.
You're welcome, sir.
Senator McCormick has a question.
Do you need to do an inventory before developing a plan, or is it the other way around? You need a plan before you do an inventory.
The way the bill is contemplated, and I think logic would have to prevail that in order to design the future system, we have to know what we currently have for assets. We have to know what their life cycle is. We have to know how to bring together all the disparate operating environments in the various emergency communication centers right now to be able to figure out how we raise which ones are going to be consolidated. If so, how do you pick who's going to be consolidated? Which ones are going to be left alone? Because Act 78 does contemplate not breaking things that are currently working well. So I believe, sir, the short answer to your question is yes, the inventory has to be done before the future system design takes place.
And how far along are you?
We're nowhere on the inventory. That's why we're hiring the people to do the inventory, to do everything that is laid out in Act 78. There is absolutely no ability for the task force to go out to 38 dispatch centers and all the various sites that might have towers, repeaters, etc., microwave systems to do that work. That's why we are hiring a firm to do that work.
Back of the envelope, when do you think the inventory will be done? And when do you think the plan will be developed?
Back of the envelope inventory, assuming we could be under contract by March 1st, I'd say 6 months. That is a guess. That is a best guess.
I understand that. And then developing the plan would start then?
No, so one of the considerations we took into account during the vetting of the proposals that we received and subsequent presentations from vendors and in scoring to determine who we were going to get into a contract with was the ability to run in multiple lanes at once so that a portion of that company would be engaged in inventorying while a different portion of the SMEs from that company would be contemplating minimum standards for governance. How do we fund this in perpetuity? So the same people would not be doing, those are very different skill sets. Likewise, the stakeholder engagement piece is a lane that can be run in concurrently. Again, people with different skill sets than the ones doing the inventorying. So, and of course, there's people who have to build propagation maps and figure out how to best identify the dead zones that are called out in Act 78. So the company that we are in contract negotiations with has a very deep bench and is able to run in many lanes concurrently. And that is why I say optimistically 6 months.
I take it you're confident in a good outcome.
I am confident in a good outcome in terms of accomplishing the mission that has been laid out for us in getting to a place where multiple options are on the table. My confidence starts to waver in the ability to build consensus at the point where we need to build consensus about how to move forward. I think that there's going to be some challenges around that, but getting to the point of having options and having done all the work assigned in Act 78, I'm very confident of that, sir.
And this is my last question. Just and this is not to contradict your confidence, but or to but in the interest of preparing for the worst, hope for the best, prepare for the worst.
Yes, sir.
Are we vulnerable? There's federal money here. Are we
Mhm.
vulnerable if things don't work out well?
I guess I'm not quite sure the question. Are you asking
Feds
if,
want their money back?
if the feds want the 9 million back?
Yeah, or part of it.
Sure. I mean, I think it would be a lost opportunity. I guess that's a vulnerability to be responsive to your question, but you know, we had a very different vision of how that money would be spent. We are adapting to the reality that has where we are based on Act 78 and the confines of the grant. And I think we have a real opportunity to build something more resilient and with a greater reach, with more on-ramps to local and county partners, so that once we decide what the future looks like and where we're building regional centers or expanding regional centers, that we will have much less investment in infrastructure required, and that the timeline would be quicker because we will have built some of that with this $9 million opportunity.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any last questions?
Madam Chair,
Yes.
strikes me that the challenge before us, all of us, is getting an inventory completed, one, followed by a design of a system based upon the inventory that exists. And then a plan on how to use that stuff. And additional materials that will be purchased with the $9 million. To buy the equipment and to build the system. And do we have an inventory now?
I think I've just identified a disconnect between what you're thinking, sir, and what I think I was trying to explain. So maybe I'm wrong. I think that you are of the belief that the $9 million is going to fit perfectly with whatever the recommendation is at the end of this process, when we have options to choose and need to pick the best path forward, right? That's gonna be like, okay, this plan implicates 4 new towers and whatever else we're building. That's not what this $9 million is going to be spent on, because we can't see into the future. So we have to do our best to use it in a way within the time constraints for expending it that will best position us for what we believe one of the future options will look like.
So you're,
Of course,
Okay.
that goes without saying. So has the inventory been completed yet?
Are you talking about the inventory of the current assets in Act 78?
Yeah.
At every dispatch center? I don't know if you're talking to me about the inventory of what our congressionally directed spending plan is, or if you're talking about the work that is laid out in Act 78 to inventory all of the assets at all of the existing public safety communication centers. Is that the inventory you're referring to? Because that's work that has not been done yet, sir.
It has not been done yet.
no,
That's correct. That's part of what the SMEs are going to be hired to do. To go to each of the 38 centers and to do the inventory of all of the existing assets in the statewide penumbra.
okay, so because your money needs to be spent before we get that and get all of the Vermont communities to agree to sign on and pay their share, which will not be a quick process. You are trying to use the $9 million you have to buy equipment that will form a backbone of the system once we inventory what's there, and so that we will have a base to work from. Is that,
And once it's designed.
and once it's designed? Yes.
Correct. We know what the state of Vermont inventory is because we operate a very extensive land mobile radio system throughout the state that serves over 100 agencies. We don't know what Shelburne has and Colchester has and Hartford has and all the other places that currently operate their own dispatch centers. We don't know what that aggregate inventory looks like. That's the work that will be being done in one lane once we get the SMEs on board.
Well, you seem to be dead in the water.
Say, I'm sorry, I didn't. Dead in the water?
Treading water.
Yeah.
Well, if the first thing is to inventory, and then we're gonna have a design based on our inventory and a plan to carry out our goals. And we haven't inventoried yet and are not inventorying at this moment.
No, they are in contract negotiations with a company to do the inventory. And then there's another company that will design once we know what's out there. At least I think that's what I've heard.
That's what you heard. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. It's not where many of us thought we would be a year ago. Senator Brock.
Well, one of the concerns I think that's been expressed is that we will expend the $9 million on something that perhaps meets the best estimates of what the future need will be. And it might meet those estimates based on what the need is for the Department of Public Safety. But depending upon the examination and the work being done on the project going forward, the end result of those recommendations may differ from that.
Oh, there's absolutely that possibility. I mean, here's where the rubber meets the road. The $9 million is time delimited.
Sure.
Right. Let's just say in a worst case scenario that we expended the money to expand the existing state-owned infrastructure, to modernize much of it that's, you know, in various stages of life, to build in resiliency where it doesn't exist, which is obviously part of what Act 78 requires. And let's say at the end of that, the only thing we did was make that network more modern, more on-ramps for other people to access the ability to use that highway, and more resilient in the face of the ever-growing number of disasters we have. We still serve over 100 entities, plus all the state entities, including AOT. If that is somehow a bad investment, I'm challenged to see how that's a bad investment. Because the option is the money goes away. So we are trying to align ourselves with the best possible use to mirror what Act 78 contemplates, but we can't match the timeline of Act 78 and the work that needs to be done to get there. So we are going to invest it. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, please finish.
No, I say we're going to invest it as responsibly as possible, given what we know today, given what the input is from the task force, given what we believe the best use of this, the highest and best use of this money is to benefit the entire state emergency communications landscape.
In terms of the project manager that we hire now and those experts that we bring on early in the process, would part of their task be to determine whether or not the plan for the use of the $9 million, from a timing perspective, that evaluation of what the options are and what the likely best use is, be done as early in the project as possible with that in mind?
So the short answer is yes. I want to make sure that we're clear that there's two different. There is a project manager that is part of the $9 million CDS. That person, we are in contract negotiations with that person. That is being funded out of the $9 million. There's also we are seeking independent expert review from that pot of money. There is the general funds that we have hired a project manager for the task force, and there is the contract that we're involved in with the SME to do all the rest of the work.
Mm-hmm.
One of the first tasks of that group, should we not be able to get the independent expert review that we seek over here, would be to weigh in on that. There's nobody who can't weigh in on the plan for the CDS. We right now have access to Televate. we can certainly ask their opinion on the best, highest and best use of that $9 million. So we are not unwilling to get input into that. We are in a process that is fraught, for lack of a better word, trying to hire an independent expert review firm. So if we do not get that in a timely manner, we will move perhaps to a sole source contract with another industry expert. But we are determined to get independent eyes on this to assuage the concerns that you have just raised.
Thank you.
Randy, do you have any more questions?
I do not.
Okay, thank you. I think what I'm hearing is you have a grant of $9 million from the feds. It went to the state police to help improve communications equipment. About the same time, Act 78 came up, and there's some general fund money that you've gotten. But we tend to think that the $9 million was there for our use in the Act 78. And technically it isn't. There's some places where it overlaps and it should, but you have to spend that 9 million by the end of the year or you lose it. And the process in the 78 group is so slow that we don't have the inventory. We can't tell you exactly where the best place to do that is. Is that?
Yes, ma'am, that's relatively accurate. The $9 million found its way into the language of Act 78. It was never the state's to spend. It's a legal agreement between the federal government and the Department of Public Safety, right? So somehow it got in there and people have continually conflated this issue and said, we have 20 million to spend on regional communications. Now, we've never tried to correct that narrative because that's exactly why we went and applied for the money. Folks are forgetting that we were in front of the legislature on this. We were applying for the money to try and build a regional communications landscape with willing operators, not with where somebody says you should put a center, etc. And then the landscape shifted based on two things: the way the money came to us through a different funding stream that we did not anticipate and didn't meet our needs, candidly, to do what we wanted to do. And then we became aware that the legislature was going to take up this issue in the new session. And it would have been folly for us to start expending that $9 million, not knowing what that was going to look like. So that's how we got where we are.
Okay, one more question, Senator McCormick.
Thanks. I'm not sure if I'm using the right terms. If the vocabulary with which I'm thinking, the state system and the regional system, are they different? If so, how? Or are they the same? Because I think the discussion has been that sort of equates the two as the same. That's equating.
No, it's a fair question. So the state system exists. It has existed for a long time. It's what the plow drivers for AOT talk on. It's state police and the other 100 agencies that use our network, right? When we talk about a regional system, that is a future thing. It does not exist currently. There is no, there are multiple centers, and I'll use the Lamoille County Sheriff's Office as an example, that are a de facto regional operator because they dispatch for more than just themselves, and they receive compensation from a dozen or more agencies for which they provide public safety communications dispatching services. So they are a de facto regional operator, but they don't have a regional communications infrastructure, i.e. a network of towers and repeaters and microwave systems that they share. It is more of a pay for service as opposed to the technical infrastructure that carries those messages. Does that answer your question?
It's my fault, no, it doesn't. But no, we have a citizen legislature, there are people who are real zealots in this. And then there are people like me who I just find out, oh, this is my job now. I don't fully understand, but I do know. Say, oh, fools, are the Fed, I asked you this earlier, it sounds like if I were the. Whoever is in the office in Washington who made the decision to send federal money for this, then my eyebrows might be raised, I might be saying, wait, we gave them the money for this and they're using it for that.
That's what they're trying to avoid.
Oh, no, actually, it's the opposite. It's the inverse. Our eyebrows were raised because if you read the grant application we submitted that was awarded, you would never have believed that this money could have come through a funding stream that didn't allow subgranting. The word subgranting appeared dozens of times. The intent of our application was very clear. So no, the COPS technology grant is actually a relatively narrow bucket, and everything that relates to public safety communications investments in the radio network is completely compatible with that funding stream. So I don't think there's any eyebrows raised. I would certainly let you know if we heard of any, but they are not. So yeah, I'd be happy to find the right person for you to talk to anytime, sir, if you need some more information on this, but I'm not the best person to give you the technical responses to this, but I can give you the systemic broad brushes.
Okay, thank you.
Randy, I'm gonna try and wrap this up.
Sure, I'd just like to add one final question for clarification, and it goes to perhaps some of the issues that Senator McDonald has raised. Is it possible at the end of the day that we wind up with two systems, a statewide system and a regional system, as opposed to a single system that serves both purposes?
Oh, I think that's possible. I don't believe that the hardware and network infrastructure would necessarily be one single system if you're trying to ensure resiliency. So I think there's a possibility that there could be multiple systems of systems, shall we say.
Well, a single system that is resilient as opposed to two entirely separate systems. In other words, a state system over here and a regional system over here that does regional dispatch. Or are you envisioning that ultimately we have a single system that's fully resilient?
I think
or you have not perhaps reached a decision as to which is the best approach.
Jen Morrison would not be able to pontificate on what is the best approach. That's why we have subject matter experts who are going to be working diligently to give us options that we will then get input on. I think that it is possible that either of those could be a future state. And I don't have any idea which would be the preferred, other than it needs to be resilient and have failover, et cetera, et cetera. So the plan that we had been on originally, sir, was a system of systems, right? And now I don't know if we'll end up with one big system, or perhaps the state infrastructure that exists and gets hardened and developed with on-ramps from smaller systems that become a big highway with smaller roundabouts. I don't know. I really don't know, sir. We have to just wait and see what the work yields.
Well, and when we did the PSAC conversation, we learned, at least that was the first time I had seen so much feedback, that it's an emotional and political issue for people, how close they are to their dispatch. It's a policy question that's way more than that, so.
Oh, it's everything's very local when it comes to summoning emergency services. And that's why I said that we could get to the end of the work prescribed in Act 78 and have a menu of options. But I think it's going to take months, if not a year, of very focused engagement and deliberation before we select a path to move forward.
And then we have to get all the towns to agree, and that, because they're gonna pay for this ultimately.
Well, there's that. How we're going to pay for it.
Unless you've got something that hasn't been covered, I'm trying to wrap this.
No, I was actually planning on being witty.
Oh,
We can
okay.
dispense this. We don't need to do that.
Okay,
Happy Friday.
thank you, Commissioner Morrison.
You're
It is
welcome.
Friday. And we will be staying in touch.
All right, I'd be happy to come back anytime and please, my cell phone number is widely published. It's at the foot of my email signature. If you have any questions, come direct. We like to provide facts, not
Okay,
information.
facts are always good. Thank you.
Thanks. Have a good day.
Okay, you too. Committee. I think we've done all we're going to do in a rational manner for this meeting. Have we been rational? These are complicated issues and some that we really don't have control over, which frustrates us. But, we will stay in, we are not the committee's jurisdiction, but we will keep an eye on things. So